Hello, I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Coming up after the news, it's Philosophy Talk.
This week, feminism and philosophy.
Oh, what's there to say about that, John? Everybody knows that women deserve equal pay for equal work and all that sort of stuff. Those debates are over.
Feminism and philosophy, Ken. Not feminism and politics or policy. Feminism and philosophy.
Oh, what do you got in mind? What's the connection?
Well, there's big basic issues about feminism. Some feminists hold that there are specifically male and female ways of thinking and knowing. That's very philosophical. They think that male-dominated culture honors the male mind and devalues and stigmatizes the female mind, and that our culture needs to be remedied.
Oh, gosh, I don't think that. Thinking is thinking, no matter who does it. So does that make me some kind of sexist if I think thinking is thinking?
Well, probably. Some feminists agree with you, though.
You're confusing me, John.
We'll straighten it all out when Philosophy Talk continues after the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Our program comes to you from the studios of 91.7 FM KALW, Information Radio for San Francisco.
But KALW's signal carries ideas and conversations that started on Philosopher's Corner down at Stanford University.
You know, down at Philosopher's Corner, a lot of people think that's where a bunch of dead white guys must hang out because they think that's what philosophy's all about, dead white guys talking.
Well, I doubt if they think that dead white guys hang out there. I think they think that the people hang out there only talk about dead white guys.
Well, yeah, you're probably right.
And they're probably only almost dead white guys hang out there. But, none of that's true anymore. There's a lot of dead white guys that were pretty darn good philosophers. But now there's a lot of non-white people and a lot of non-guy people.
And a lot of non-dead people.
And a lot of non-dead people that are very important philosophers. In the 20th century, a lot of important philosophers were women. Simone de Beauvoir, Elizabeth Anscombe, Philippa Foot, Ruth Marcus, Marilyn Frye, to name just a handful.
Yeah.
And in our own department and other departments, a significant number, not an adequate number, but a significant number of the philosophers of today are women. And, a lot of them are feminists, and some of them think that at least one of us doesn't quite get it.
Well, so we're going to talk about philosophy and feminism today, right? So let's start out. Well, what is feminist philosophy, or what is philosophy? What is feminism? Tell me, help me think about that.
Well,
I guess I'm the one who doesn't get it. Is that it? No.
I didn't say that. I can't tell you what feminism is. Maybe at the end of the hour we'll know. But I can tell you kind of where we could get started. And that is with sexism and male chauvinism. Everybody knows what that is, and we've seen feminism as at least starts out as a reaction to recognition that those things are pretty dominant in our society.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you could see it on an analogy. I wonder if you could see it on an analogy with racism. Racism is treating people differently on the basis of their race, right? But here's a view. I think it's a correct view. Racial distinctions are invidious. They don't really make any real distinctions between people. Black people and white people are fundamentally the same, morally the same, cognitively the same. And so institutions that treat them differently, they're just oppressive, and we should get rid of them, right? So could we think of sexism on that analogy and feminism as trying to get rid of that?
Well, I think it's a good analogy to start with, but it has its limits. First, just within the civil rights movement, things kind of went from what we want is to have a equal right to the good places that white society has set up for people, to what we want is a rethinking of society so that not just the traditional white values are thought through.
So you recognize that there's a multiplicity of sort of equally valid ways of being a human being, and some of those track with racial differences, and you don't stigmatize people because of that. You honor and valorize those things. Maybe.
Well, yeah, and of course the other thing is that while racial differences are quite plausibly pretty superficial and not biologically basic, it's at least arguable that the differences between males and females is somewhat more biologically significant, and that manifests itself in many ways. So,
it may
so
be.
The analogy's not perfect.
You know what I think we should do? I think we should think about what the broader world thinks. Because, I love talking to you. But, our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen, went out and talked to lots of people, lots of women, about what they think feminism consists in. She files this report.
Among our generation, my friends I know don't use that word. I don't use that word.
I don't say it as much as I should just because I still feel like there's a stigma to it, which I know I shouldn't feel.
Feminism, number 1. The doctrine advocating social, political, and all other rights of women equal to those of men.
It's a person that sticks up for their rights and wants women to be equal to men and wants to get paid the same amount.
For me, it goes into the realm of embracing that I was born a female and celebrating that and figuring out what that means.
I think that there's some sort of misconceptions or stereotypes about what feminism is or who is a feminist, an attempt to marginalize those claims, but I just see it as being a woman who's actively engaged in life.
It's like one subsidiary of the idea that all people are created equal and should have the same expectations, opportunities, salaries. Feminism has all sorts of connotations to it now that has everything to do with hating sex or being a bra burner or being angry or choosing an unflattering haircut. That shouldn't be what feminism is about, because feminism is based on something pretty simple, which is just that everyone deserves the same level of respect and all that comes from it.
Feminism, number 2. An organized movement for the attainment of such rights for women.
I think it's really important to be political. And I guess at its most basic form, that just means voting, because you have to protect your right to self-determination. And that has to do with protecting your right to have access to birth control, because there's nothing more self-determining than whether you reproduce and when you reproduce.
I always sort of felt like feminism isn't something you talk about, it's something you do. For me, feminism means you take the job that you want, you make the friends that you want, you become yourself to the greatest degree possible, and you don't let anyone put a costume on you.
We do that in our everyday lives. We speak up for ourselves. We're not afraid to go in a group with men and speak our mind, especially at school or at work. There's no need for that word anymore just because we're at that place.
3. Feminine character.
There's certain kinds of women that really push my buttons. And a certain type that really pushes my buttons is the type that I see really overtly using their sexuality to get what they want. Because it's like there's so much more to who you are, and that's such an easy trick. And I'm sure that for, countless eons going back through the ages, that of course women used that to get what they wanted or needed. Now we've got all these choices,
When we think about feminism, we think of this earnest, angry, humorless, nitpicky movement that's also full of hypocrisy. But as a topic, maybe if we renamed feminism human beings, then it wouldn't seem quite as cliched.
I think a feminist now is completely different from a feminist from maybe the 1920s, because at least the 1920s, it was a suffrage movement that was going on. Now it's more like a regular woman who doesn't need to say that she's a feminist, because it's like you see it in her actions.
I think there's going to have to be a renaissance of feminism, because there are so many young girls who take for granted the way things are and don't have a sense of history about their freedoms being hard-won. And so I have a feeling that there will have to be some precipitating events, whether it be rollbacks of reproductive rights. That's what it'll probably be.
I'm John Perry, here with my partner Ken Taylor, and you're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our topic is philosophy and feminism. Before we take calls, let's introduce our guest, Ken.
And our guest today is Professor Barrie Thorne. She hails from across the bay over at Berkeley, where she's a professor of sociology and chair of the Women's Studies program at that august institution. She's author of lots of things. She's author of this great book, Gender Play, Girls and Boys in School. I think of that as part of the canon of feminist theorizing. She's also co-editor of Feminist Sociology and Rethinking the Family, Some Feminist Questions. Barrie Thorne, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Hi, Barrie. So let's start off with a question about exactly how you conceive of feminism. It sounded like from Amy's piece that there's many different conceptions. Some people just see it as kind of an extension of the basic idea of civil rights and equal rights. Others see it as a really positive movement to change basic parameters of the way we live our lives. Where do you fall into this?
I accept both of those premises. I think it's fundamentally about human rights, but it also is arguing for very fundamental changes. Let me just answer this in kind of 4 brief parts and start off with Ken's point. about race being what Ruben Rambaud has called a pigment of our imagination.
That's a nice phrase.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
There's a similar phrase that a philosopher, Valerie Walkerdine, created, which is gender is a fantasy and fiction that is lived as fact, which is to say, indeed, there are biological differences between people in these two gender categories of man and woman, but there's a lot of slippage at the edges, and just because people may have some difference of genitals or reproduction doesn't mean that this should be a basis for dividing us in the workforce, for making claims about differences of temperament, for excluding people from rights. So I'll just say quickly, feminism is premised on the assumption that gender is not a given of nature, but that our notions of femininity, masculinity, and even the division of female-male itself is socially created, historically changing, and can be changed.
But Barrie, just let me interrupt there.
Yeah.
You're using the term gender,
Mhm.
and that's sometimes distinguished from sex. Are you using it that way? And if so, could you explain the distinction?
Yeah. These terms overlap, and I think it's one of these fruitful ambiguities. But often in gender and women's studies, we talk about biological sex and try to use the word sex when we're referring to chromosomes, hormones, anatomy. And we use the word gender when we're referring to the meanings and social organization that are loosely attached to these biological phenomena. But it gets tricky because our very notions of biology have changed historically. They're also part of culture, so there's no escaping culture even when we talk about bodies.
Okay.
But even if somebody said, well, let's oversimplify the biological side, let's assume there are males and females and it's pretty much fixed, then with this distinction you'd say, yeah, but what that shouldn't imply is that everyone who's biologically female needs to play the so-called, in quotes, female gender role. That's
Right.
kind of where the distinction
But let's
started out
remember
getting its traction, right?
Everything about biology comes in variation. It's not fixed into two. That's the idea of the opposite sexism that we come into only two types is really a fabrication of
Okay,
culture.
but even if we let's grant that. But I want to kind of bracket that because I think the point that you're both making still stands. However, we take about the fixity of the biology or not fixity, there's something else that's not the biology, not determined straightforwardly by the biology, and let's reserve gender for that.
A huge apparatus, if I may
Right,
say.
yeah.
But let me also make the important second part of this argument, which was raised in the piece before, which is that gender divisions and arrangements are tied to differences of power, different accesses to resources, different abilities to control your fate. And it's that inequality and the subordination of women, and the third belief that it's unjust and can and should be changed that is the core of feminism.
Right.
Then let me quickly tack on one more point, which is that gender doesn't ever exist by itself. It's deeply connected to other forms of difference and inequality, like racial inequality, social class divisions, sexuality divisions, and inequalities.
Right. Since you're a sociologist, you would bring that to the fore because you got to see the whole context.
But let me see if I can chart out some other possible feminisms. So suppose we agree with your first point. So we say like gender is not tied to sexual differences, which even themselves are much more floating and slippery than we thought. It's a huge apparatus, and it's quite different. There's two quite different social roles eked out by these gender things. And I agree, let's suppose, that sexual males shouldn't have to play the male gender role and females shouldn't have to play the female gender role. But I hesitate on saying that they're inherently unequal or one is subordinate. This is a hypothetical position here. Is that so clear? Couldn't it be that they're kind of two honorable roles negotiated through evolution in primitive culture?
Before you answer that question,
Yeah.
let me give our callers a a chance to weigh in here. We'll be taking your calls in a little bit. We're talking with about feminism and philosophy with Professor Barrie Thorne from UC Berkeley. You can join us by giving us a call at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. A question you can think about, are women and men the same? If not, what parts of our culture are male, which are female? And what exactly does feminism have to do with this? Give us a call at 415-841-4134. We'll be right back to continue our conversation.
Any note you can reach, I can go higher.
I can sing anything higher than you.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
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 Ethel Merman and Ray Middleton singing Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better. Who would have thought that Ethel could get up to that high note? That's from the musical Annie Get Your Gun. I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. And I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing feminism with Professor Barrie Thorne of the UC Berkeley. We'd like you to join us as well.
Ken, I was trying to give an opening there to people that think as you do. Maybe some of our callers do. Our number is 415-841-4134, or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org if you hold one of these different brands of feminism we've been talking about and want to advocate it.
So you were trying to give me an opening. I mean, because here's the thing you might think. I'm not sure it's at odds with anything you said. I'm not sure. But you might think, we talked about this at the top. You might think, well, look, there is a distinct. Men and women aren't exactly the same. Males and female. There are distinctions. There's maleness. There's femaleness. Maybe it's plastic and fluid, but there's something like this. Say, men care about autonomy and self-government. Women care about connectedness and caring. And both those things are good. And a society that has one but not the other as dominant is in some ways diminished. So in some ways we need to find a way to bring these two things together, but we need not deny. We need not deny that there are these differences. What do you think about that?
That's a real tangled phenomenon, and so let me just separate it out kind of by layers. There is a deep belief that equates men with self-sufficient autonomy. You got to be powerful, strong, suppress vulnerability, and that equates women with more relatedness and connectedness to others, more inherent nurture, responsibility for care. Those are real powerful beliefs, and so they in themselves can have an effect in the world. And it is also the case that women historically have been allocated to positions of motherhood, responsibility for care of the elderly, allocated to jobs like nursing. So indeed, statistically, women may be shaped more in a relatedness caring direction. But one of the tricky things about gender difference is if you go out and study it empirically, it is never a dichotomy. You can't name, I would challenge you two folks to name one difference between men and women that falls out as a dichotomy. So all men sit in one pile and all women sit in another. If you do tests about nurture, you'll find some men are more nurturant than some women, etc.
Yeah, I respect empirical people. That's I don't like to talk just to abstract a priori philosophers, although I think that's important too. But I respect. I wouldn't claim that all men are this, all men are that, all women are that. I would never claim that, and I don't even know if I endorse this view. But there might be a central tendency to men's cognitive, emotional, normative lives and women's. And that central tendency might be non-accidental, right? Because everywhere you look, all throughout history, there are gender divisions. Is it accidental that societies come with the gender roles distributed in some way or other?
All societies that we know of do have a division between women and men, but the degree to which they emphasize it, the degree to which it's connected to huge differences of power or allocation to different kinds of labor varies a great deal. So some people put emphasis on the variation, others to the recurring pattern. But getting back to this skew, I actually do agree with you. It's hard to sort this out, but sometimes I tell my students, let me go out on a limb here, that I've got the key to patriarchy. And the key to patriarchy psychologically is men's fear of vulnerability. And that's how you can really get to men, as the Abu Ghraib imprisoners and interrogators knew, is by humiliating them and making them feel vulnerable. Women, on the other hand, are expected to display more vulnerability. They're actually more likely statistically to go to the doctor than men are.
I heard on the radio last night that the average person tells 5 lies a week.
Interesting.
And that the average male is lying to protect himself from being humiliated or criticized, and the average female is lying to protect someone else from having their feelings hurt.
Oh my goodness!
And I'm sure this was empirical because I didn't make it up.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, there's people make this distinction. I think I've got this right between sameness feminism and difference feminism, where difference feminism says, well, look, men and women, or the male and the female, there are these differences, and our mistake, the sexist mistake, is to honor and valorize, as people sometimes put it, the male over the female. And what we need is a more inclusive kind of paradigm of what the good is, what good ways of being is.
Let me go at that another direction, which comes from a statement Linda Gordon, the feminist historian, made some years ago. She wrote that a deep strand in the history of feminism is a tension between individualism and its critique. So the kind of sameness feminism, which is based on the philosophy of liberalism, going back to Mary Wollstonecraft, an early feminist philosopher of the 1700s, that philosophy says, I want my piece of the pie. Gender should not be an obstacle any more than race should be to access to equal pay, the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like taking things as they are. Give us all equal rights. But then there's another strand of feminism that comes back and says, equal rights to what? If it's a society premised on huge substantive inequalities, and if the political system is based on market values of individual choice rather than on human need and values of care, we should critique it. And one basis for critiquing it comes out of women's attachment to families and responsibility for caring and maternal values. And so we want to actually, I want both of those things. I want individual rights, and I want a more caring society.
Well, so I want individual rights and a more caring society, too. But now, one strand of feminism, correct me if I'm wrong, that comes out of this second view, says, even really untouchable parts of our society and culture, like science, even philosophy, are tainted by male values of competitiveness, and sometimes even objectivity is included. And that is there really something to feminism that would undermine the idea of the objectivity of science, or the idea that competitive argument is the way to find truth?
Yes, undermine in the sense of critique, call attention to, and open and bring in other ways of approaching these subjects. So there is indeed, Evelyn Fox Keller, among others, and Sandra Harding have developed excellent critiques of the premises of objectivity in the more positivist natural sciences and social sciences, and argued that the kind of separation of the knower from the known is too sharp, and that a more relational approach and a more relational definition and strategy of objectivity will actually enhance our ways of knowing.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Professor Barrie Thorne of the UC Berkeley about feminism. You can give us a call and join our conversation at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Or send us an email comment to comment@philosophytalk.org. And we have some callers on the line now. Pirette in Corte Madera. Did I get that right, Pirette? Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Yes, you did. Thank you. I want to talk about the recognition that women thinkers have received. For example, the women around Emerson. I know the transcendentalists are very passé, but Margaret Fuller and the Peabody sisters and others really contributed to that whole important conversation in our history. And it seems to me it's barely taught. And I'm wondering if a person could even get a PhD in studying the women transcendentalists because they're so neglected.
Well, I'm sure you could get a PhD studying the women transcendentalists at Stanford. Or Princess Elizabeth, one of Descartes' most intelligent critics. But I agree with you. The role women have played traditionally in philosophy, going back before the mid part of the 20th century, was often as a critique and a collaborator and a silent partner of some male that gets all the credit and the fame.
And there's a great move to kind of rediscover these lost figures in various circles, and it has more steam in some places. So it's a complicated thing. Erica in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Erica.
This is a really fascinating subject, and I was listening to Marty Nemco's show. It started with Marty Nemco's show in my thinking, and I'm in the middle of writing right now. And I'm 37, and my mom was a feminist, and so I have a lot of ideas, and I'm not afraid of the word, and I am ashamed of a lot of women my age who are afraid of the word. But at being at 37, I'm finding that the people who've been some of my biggest advocates, and I'm a colored girl, and finding some of my best advocates for doing different kinds of things, and in art have been white guys. And I wrote something to Marty Nemco about whether you'd rather have a woman boss or a male boss, and I said male boss hands down. And I feel like there's I have internalized misogyny about some stuff, and I'm having issues with it because I guess when I'm around women, I always tend to get in trouble because I feel like I'm not. And what's interesting to me about what you guys are talking about is that you're talking about something on a continuum, about it's not black or white. And so I feel like I'm not in on like the potluck thing, I'm not in on like the caretaking thing, or wanting to have kids. And although I've had little inklings of those, but I'm not saying that like proud. I'm not saying that at all because I think that I don't want to get old in a society that's the way we've been now, that's been more masculine. But I'm just saying that it's hard. I also feel like women, sometimes take that too far, and we have to read each other's minds, and it happens when you're in relationships with women. That's what some of the fights are about.
Erica, you sound like a very fascinating person with lots of things going on in your mind that bring up these issues. You also sound to me at 37, my word for that age is child.
He's because he's an old
Be careful
guy.
now.
Yeah, be careful.
So lots of choice.
Yeah, you've got a lot of you've got a lot of time to figure all this out, and but maybe our guest Barrie can give you some help.
You want to weigh in on this?
Yes. When I said that feminism was trying to broaden the repertoire for everybody, I did not mean at all to perpetuate the idea that all women must define themselves by care or all women must have children. We want to open and challenge masculinity as well, so men have capabilities of acknowledging their vulnerability. And so, many flowers should bloom. But I think most of us, at least the three here at this table and you, could unite around the idea that we would want to develop a society that's more oriented to human need and more acknowledging of human interdependence than our existing culture.
Barrie, here's a kind of a factual question for you. Is there a book that outlines those 4 points that you put forward?
Yes, Estelle Friedman at Stanford has a book, and now I have to remember the title. Maybe you can quickly hunt it up on. And Freedman. It's a fabulous book about the difference that feminism has made and how it's reconstructed thinking.
You can Google Estelle Friedman, and we'll have the title later on in the show, maybe.
Thanks for the call, Erica.
Could I say one other book, excellent advanced textbook, accessible to anyone, by a philosopher, Rosemarie Tong, is called Feminist Thought.
Okay, you got that, folks. Now, look, I'm going to ask you a sort of fundamental question, because I'm impressed by the arguments that these gender roles are fluid and multiple and flexible, ever changing. And I know there's historical studies about how the perception of gender roles has changed over time. But I still want to come back to the point: why is it that gender, that labor, is distributed according to gender at all? Because it seems to me non-accidental, and I wonder about whether we really could ever sort of eliminate some kind of distribution of gender roles at all, right? Totally.
I recommend a wonderful science fiction novel by Marge Piercy called Women on the Edge of Time, which posits a gender-free society where there is still biological reproduction. Now, she does have test tube babies, an idea of which I'm not particularly fond. But sure, in all societies, let me put it this way. When I lecture about cross-cultural arrangements of gender, there's no society that we know of where men do more child-rearing than women. Women across cultures assume somewhat more responsibility for children. But there are people like Queen Victoria that have never done their own child care, and there are societies where men have participated a fair amount. So I think that skew, and it's probably also tied to another skew, which is men's control of states and political power. I think that is loosely connected to the fact of biological reproduction. But with birth control, etc., you got new options.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But if you think about it, like, sometimes I'm disposed to in sort of evolutionary terms, and it's this complex coordination problem. We all got to get along together, right, and not be choking each other and reproducing together. There's men coordinating with other men over, who's going to get which women to mate with them. Women coordinating with other women over who's going to mate with which men, and then men and women coordinating together. Right?
Some of us have other considerations.
I know, but this is just a vast reproductive game, and I suspect if you could run a vast evolutionary argument, you'd find that there's bound to be some kind of gender distribution because of this coordination problem over reproduction.
But there are societies where the division is much more flexible than others. And this kind of argument doesn't tell us why it is, as Margaret Mead framed it, that whatever work men do cross-culturally tends to be more valued. Why when men cook are they called chefs? Okay, that's the edge of privilege and power, which isn't accounted for by your argument.
I'd like to be as honored and earn as much as Emerald does, but he's maybe the exception. Now, let me ask you a slightly different question. I don't know how philosophical this is, but I guess it's philosophical. The way things seem to be working out in American society, or particularly that part of it I'm most familiar with, the part around academia, is these gender roles get split up. That is, one person will now do a fair amount of child rearing and nurturing and what we used to call homemaking, and will also have a job, and so will the mate, right? Both the woman and the man will be holding down a job and doing their share of childcare. Now, empirically,
women are doing much more
childcare. But my question is splitting it up that way the best? Agreed that the fact that one is biologically this or that shouldn't limit one's options.
Absolutely
Men should
not.
be as absolutely free to stay home with the kids as not. But might it be better for the kids if one person was really charged with that responsibility?
I think actually
don't the kids get shortchanged otherwise?
I think they often get shortchanged if they only have one intensive, frustrated person. That was the problem of the 50s. And look at all the men like Philip Wiley who've complained about it. I think children are better off the more caring people they have in their lives. I think part of the problem of many middle and upper middle class households is they're too isolated from other people. We need all kinds of people involved in the care of children.
And we need all kinds of people involved in this conversation. You can join our conversation by giving us a call at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. We're eager to hear your voice. Let us know what you think about these matters. This is complicated, controversial stuff. Weigh in.
That number is 415-841-4134. Philosophy Talk. We'll be right back. Aretha Franklin and Annie Lennox singing Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Joining us is Professor Barrie Thorne of the UC Berkeley. You can join our conversation about feminism by calling 415-841-4134.
That's 415-841-4134, or email your thoughts to comments@philosophytalk.org. And speaking of that, we've got two things that have come in by email. First, the title of Estelle Friedman's book is No Turning Back, The History of Feminism and the Future of Women. Highly recommended book. Secondly, Wayne. Here's a comment from Wayne. If you want to know if men and women are equal, just ask my 1-year-old daughter. Every day while my wife is working, I am at home taking care of my daughter. I do everything a good mom would do. I feed my daughter. I take her for walks to playgrounds. I play with her at home. But when mom comes home, dad is old news. It's mom she wants. So much for gender equity.
Oh, but that's just because she hasn't seen mom all day.
Exactly.
That's not
just what dad's got for years.
Right, exactly. So I don't know what that proves, Wade. Where were we before? I want to ask you a question about, you mentioned this stuff about objectivity and all that. John mentioned that in passing and you responded. I want to know, do you think that the sort of fundamental categories of thought, like reason, some people argue, we think rationality is such a good thing. And then some feminists have said, but rationality, that's a male thing, or objectivity, that's a male thing. And are the fundamental categories of thought really gendered?
I don't think so. I think we all have the capacity for reason, but I think there are particular kinds of reason, like instrumental reason, affectless reason, where, as my partner Peter Lyman says, where
You're going to have to explain those things to our...
where he wrote in a paper, be reasonable. In arguments between men and women, there's the kind of thing where the woman gets positioned as hysteric and overly emotional, and the man will say, be reasonable, when in fact he is full of anger and rage, and it means obey me.
Right.
So there are different, when I say instrumental reason, I mean the kind of like technocratic rationality of planning war scenarios, where in fact you're going to, you should be full of cautionary emotions, but you're suppressing them. So we use the word reason, we kind of fine tune it with different qualifiers, and some of them tend to have a masculine freighting, and others a more feminine.
But that's a way of saying then that what parades as rationality is not really full blown. There's this sort of male-centric, some people use the phrase phallocentric notion of rationality that parades as rationality to core, full stop. But the feminist critique would be, hey, wait a minute. That's not rationality, full stop. Here's what reasoning is, more fully.
More fully.
Yeah.
Multiple means. And
but but a more adequate theory of human reasoning or human valuing or something, or human action or human relations would recognize these things. Why does one have to be a feminist to recognize?
No, not at all. But because various orientations or capacities or emotions have been divided in belief systems, and some projected onto women and some onto men, by speaking out from a maternal standpoint, or the standpoint of the group that has been equated with certain qualities, that provides a vehicle into opening the wider repertoire.
Yeah.
Could I give you a quick example?
Sure.
That it also relates to an earlier question where we were talking about different orientations, which isn't quite the same thing as thinking, but is connected. One of Carol Gilligan's her most important contribution, she's a feminist psychologist who's often equated with emphasizing women's relationality and capacities for care. And I think relationality is a human quality. It doesn't have to just be equated with women. But she pointed out that traditional theories of human development and growth have overvalued separation, the increasing growth of separateness from others, a separate self till you're fully autonomous. And she argued that if you listened carefully to the voices of girls, you would see more valuing than you tended to find with boys of connections with others, capacities of relatedness. So that helped name these sort of devalued forms of human capacity and connectedness. And then Joan Tronto, a feminist political theorist, in a book called Moral Boundaries, took it a step further, and she wrote an article called Beyond Gender Difference to a Theory of Care, and said don't just equate that with the female gender. It's a human capacity.
Right. But it's one that the feminist critique can help us to see we've disavowed.
Help us all to see, give you the gift so you can be related too.
Right.
So in other words, more and more, firstly, distinguish sex from gender. That means don't tie these possible roles in human life to sexual characteristics. And then we say, well, and there's good things that come out of these roles, but they don't need to be tied to that either. Caring is a. But let me ask you specifically about philosophy and this. Do you think since Socrates, we've had this kind of competitive picture of philosophy. You give a definition, and I'll destroy it. Do you think there's room for a cooperative approach to philosophy?
I sure do.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to go to law school and have that Socratic method aimed at me.
Look at Philosophy Talk. We exemplify the
cooperative method, right?
So
yes,
we've got
exactly.
we've got a flood of callers here. We're getting toward the
Okay.
end of the hour, so let's take a couple. Susan in Oakland, welcome to Philosophy Talk, Susan.
Hi. My question is more of just what I observe in my own children. I try to raise them gender neutral, giving them similar toys and things, but my daughter has always loved books and art supplies and sitting on people's laps, and my son, who's 20 months old, he goes straight for the cars and makes noises and drives them all over the place and throws things all the time. And I've got to say, I thought it was all socialization, how gender roles developed. But I'm beginning, right now, I believe it's a lot of hardwiring, too. So
Susan.
how does this fit into the mix?
Susan, you're asking one of the right people. Barry's book, Gender Play, Girls and Boys in School. You got to go read that. But Barry,
Thank you. If my children, it was the reverse. So I think we tend to project from our own deep experience and then begin to conclude what is biological. Even at 20 months, there have been all kinds of cultural influences. And I think something parents know better than anyone else is that individuals come with very different temperaments. Some of it may seem to skew by gender, but you have to have another child who doesn't quite fit that skew, and you begin to realize what enormous variation there is.
Yeah, we have lots of callers on the line. Well, we have time for one brief one. Andrea in San Francisco, and I'm sorry to all you folks who are waiting on the line who can't get it. Andrea, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Yeah, thank you. While I appreciated the academic nature of the discussion and the fact that feminism has been institutionalized, so to speak, I work with a simpler definition with girls, and I think it works for men, women, and boys too, and that is that feminism is simply the belief and the practice that everyone matters. And I think if you look at it that clearly without too much jargon and too much preconception, it's a much easier and much more practical and effective way to be a feminist.
Thanks very much, Andrea. You have a brief comment to that?
I think that's terrific because it also means people matter, whether they're short, fat, it's the whole array of human variation. We all should matter.
But there's nothing specifically feminine about the idea that everyone matters, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So feminism is really
so
focusing on the gender.
What we want to move to is everyoneism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our guest today has been Professor Barrie Thorne of the UC Berkeley. She's author of many books, including a fine book, Gender Play, Girls and Boys in School, and Rethinking the Family. Professor Thorne, it's been a great pleasure having you on Philosophy Talk.
My
Thanks.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
So, John, what did we learn today? Are you wiser?
Oh, every day in every way I get wiser and more of a wiseacre, I suppose, too. I think I learned a lot about feminism. One of the most respected feminists around told us that she wasn't going to go for this idea that reason was something that belonged to males. I was happy to hear that. But she gave some good ideas about how reason narrowly defined can be quite different from reason as the shared privilege of all of us.
I mean, I think that's the most striking thing that feminist theory has to contribute to these debates, is to deepen our understanding of the sources of human value, of the nature of human cognition. Because I'm not sure. I don't think it's. I don't think I'm a difference feminist, as we call that, but I do think that difference feminists are onto something, that there's stuff that we haven't recognized as part of the total collection of human goods and human virtues. And I think that's an important realization that feminism, among other things, has helped us to. I mean, if we were just being better theorizers, we should see these things already.
One remark that Barry made about going to law school, she wouldn't want to go to law school and have all that Socratic stuff thrown at her, reminded me of Hume. Hume said he went to study the law and it appeared nauseous to him. If you look at Hume's dialogues, it's really, there's quite a bit of cooperation. There's some pretty hard-hitting argument, but as opposed to some other dialogues, there's a cooperative sense of philosophy.
Yeah, we could talk about this all day, but we got to move on. The discussion continues on our forum at www.philosophytalk.org.
If you come to me sickly, you know I'm gonna make you well. If you come to me all hexed it's loving you like an I'll kiss you and give you the shivering fits, 'cause I'm a woman. W-O-M-A-N. And that's all.
Hey, Ken, you been to any good movies?
Well, I've been to a philosophical movie. I think it's the single most philosophical movie I have ever seen. What the bleep do we know?
What the bleepity bleep?
This is a kind of a strange movie because it's part documentary and part fictional narrative.
It's about science and philosophy and religion. And as I understand it, goes like this. You might have thought that science and religion were antagonistic, but that's because you were thinking of science as a kind of a set of principles that ended in just hard bits of matter and how they interact with each other. But it turns out science isn't that at all. Science terminates in quantum physics, and quantum physics isn't little bits of matter that interact with each other. It's little packets of probabilities that make no sense at all and which have no determinate properties until some consciousness inspects them and collapses the wave function.
But so matter is mysterious, okay? But then the big question is, what are we? If we're just chunks of matter, then you think, where's freedom, where's consciousness, where's will, where's rationality, where's love? Because matter just spins around in these weird ways. And how do we arise out of the material universe?
A problem I have with the movie is that it gives three different answers as far as I can tell. One answer is that, look, we don't have what we think of as reality with just the physical part of it. We have to have that consciousness that makes things determinate, that collapses the wave function. At one point, somebody even supposes that God's creation of the world was an instance of consciousness collapsing the wave function.
Could be.
And so that would make consciousness kind of a quite different principle, be kind of a dualism. There would be these kind of physical facts, and then there would be consciousness, and then the world would be kind of the joint product of the two. But it's much different from another theme in the movie, which is that we're all united and we really aren't any different than quantum physics things are. So we get to be as mysterious as they are, and isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And then a third theme seems to be that we're all one, we're all united, so our problems will go away. That seems really bizarre to me.
Let's tell people something about how this movie actually goes. It's partly a talking heads movie. There are all these people. Some of them are quantum physicists. One's a theologian. One's a philosopher of science, and all the while being weaved in between is this narrative with Marlee Matlin, which I can never quite figure out what the two things have to do with each other. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I thought that once you realize that quantum physics is completely mysterious and that the brain is completely complicated, you'll give up your anti-anxiety drugs that you've become addicted to and feel at one with the universe and hug your obnoxious little roommate.
Oh, is that what?
And I think at this point, the message of the movie shifts between the two points of view I suggested. I mean, if we are a separate principle from matter that kind of just observes this and collapses the wave function and creates reality, then we seem to be determined by very different principles than the ordinary things we see in life, the rugs and carpets and doors and computers. On the other hand, if we kind of rise up out of the quantum mechanical, then it's hard to see why that would make us freer than the doors and windows and chairs and computers that we deal with every day.
I think you're right. I mean, they're trying to hang their hat on the idea that you have to posit the observer to explain objects with determinate positions.
Yeah.
And the only way that quantum mechanics lets in objects, or you and me, or tables or chairs or mountains or anything, is by the observer collapsing the wave function. So to get these things in, you have to have the observer. And we're that special thing. You are the observer. And in being the observer, one of them says, you are God. You create reality.
Is there an uncollapsed collapser? That would be God. Then the rest of us would just be the results of his collapsing the wave function.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if each of us gets to be a collapser, then we're not the collapsed.
So obviously, you don't fully admire the philosophy in this movie. But I have to say, there aren't very many movies with this much philosophical ambition and chutzpah. And we got to admire that.
I admire the pretensions of this movie enormously.
Well, John, they're going to kick us out of here. I think we're talking too much.
We've been talking about the film What the Bleep do we know? We don't limit our discussion to just movies, though. We'd like to hear about any philosophical conundrums from your own life.
Yeah, you got puzzles about space and time, about what's the right thing to do? Send us an email at conundrums@philosophytalk.org. We can't promise we'll solve all your problems. Actually, we promise we won't solve them all, but we'll give you a whole raft of ways to think about them.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2004.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Peter Crimmins, Nicole Sawaya, Roman Mars, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Hoover Institution, the Greenwald Foundation, and the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association.
Also from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and members of KALW 91.7 Information Radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
Everybody should be a friend of Philosophy Talk and a member of KALW. The views expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. Lots of good things on that website. Go check it out. I'm John Perry.
He sure is. I can vouch for him. I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.